Happy Wednesday, DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Busy show for us. There was a comment that a recruit gave to Jeff Santel recently that I do think shares some insight into what might be going on in the future at UGA. I'll lay all that out for you coming up. There is big news around the SEC that we'll have to cover. Off the top of the program, my one concern for why Georgia, if it doesn't win the national championship this season, why it is that takes place. So we'll cover a lot of ground today. Connor Riley going to be our guest. He'll have some interesting things to say. It is a busy edition of our program, and I'm glad to have you with you. Let me try that one more time. I'm glad to have you with us for it. As DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So I say all the time that, I'm a Georgia partisan, right? I mean, I wear Georgia gear in my studio, the palatial DawgNation World Headquarters studios. When I look around on these walls, I see Georgia memorabilia that I've collected over the years. And I make no bones about the fact that I'm a fan, do the show for fans. This is not media for media. This is a broadcast product that's meant to be consumed by fans. And so from that standpoint, sometimes the way in which I talk about Georgia might be a little bit different than the way that other people talk about Georgia. I firmly, truly believe as you move into this upcoming season, Georgia has a chance to win the national championship. I would say that even if, the rest of the Power 5 leagues were all playing, Georgia would still be on the short list of teams that have a real strong chance of doing that. No one would deny that. You don't have to be a fan to necessarily view it that way. However, the one thing that I'm not going to let my fandom for UGA, cloud my judgment on or anything like that, and hopefully we have a reputation of doing things this way around here when it comes to DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. I'm not going to let my fandom for UGA trick me into thinking that there are no potential stumbling blocks, no potential reasons why Georgia might not actually get this done. Obviously, even the most objective viewer out there would say, yeah, Georgia's got a real chance to win a national championship. But hopefully those of us who are partisans and want that outcome to occur, hopefully we are able to look and see some of the reasons why that might not happen, because I do think it gives us a better understanding of what needs to happen this year for UGA. Let me give you an example of that off the top of the program here today. And for me, this is kind of a return to a familiar theme. It's something I've talked about before. I have no doubt that Georgia has a lot of good players on its roster. If you just use the word good, however you want to define it, there's a chance that Georgia may have more good players than anyone in the country. And for now, we'll include a program like Ohio State that's not playing this upcoming season. If the standard is good, Georgia may have more good than anyone. Or if the standard is potential, the potential talent on this roster, the possibility for breakout seasons, the sheer athleticism, the raw materials to really build great individual seasons, therefore combining for a great team performance. If you want to define, the word potential here, Georgia may have more potential than any team in America. Truly good players, Georgia's got a long list of it. Potential for even more, Georgia's got a lot of that too. But if you want to look at, a little bit different definition, a little bit more substantial word, like the word great. Admittedly, when I look at Georgia and its chances of winning a national championship, I wonder, does Georgia truly have enough great players to get that done? And there's a way of looking at this right now to say, on paper here before the start of the season, maybe Georgia, by comparison to some of the other top teams in the country, maybe they don't quite have as many on paper right now great players as other programs do. And if you want to look at the reason why or the pathway in which Georgia won a national championship this season, finding more guys from the ranks of good players and turning them to great players, or more players from the ranks of potential and actually make that come to fruition on the field this season, that may be as important for Georgia as anything possibly could be. Let me give you some numbers that kind of back up what I'm talking about here. Now, obviously, this is just sort of one group of people's opinion. It's not the end-all, be-all on anything, but it is a data point. It's an indicator. It's something worth considering. ESPN has put out its list of top 50 players in all of college football. Georgia had 2 players on this list for top 50 for the upcoming season. Richard LeCounte, the Georgia safety, comes in at number 38 on this list. Jamie Newman, the Georgia quarterback, we presume is going to be the starter. At least I presume around here he'll be the starter. Newman comes in at number 44 on this list. So of the top 50 players in the country, now, by the way, ESPN did include players that are not playing. And I know that's weird for a lot of you because why would you do that? But just as a way of, I guess, giving credit to who might have had a chance to do something this year. Pac-12 players, so like Penei Sewell's on this list. Big Ten players, so there's a lot of guys from Ohio State. Rondale Moore, who's even opted out of the season even before Purdue decided it wasn't playing. So there are a lot of guys on this list that were either not going to play football at their team in conference played or their conference is not playing. This is the top 50 list as we would have understood it if the entire country was playing. But even with that, Georgia has 2 players in this list. LeCounte at 38, Jamie Newman at 44. By comparison, Clemson only has 2 as well, but it's 2 of the top 7. Georgia has number 38 and number 44. Clemson's got Trevor Lawrence, number 1 overall. Travis Etienne, the running back, coming in at number 7 overall. You can see why, even with the same number of players on this list, Clemson just kind of has more guys at the top end of that. If your quarterback's the best player in the country, if your running back's the 7th best player in the country, that's quite a boost to your offensive performance. That's a little bit of a nod, it would seem, in Clemson's direction. How about this? Georgia's chief competition in the SEC, Alabama, has 6 players in the top 20 of this list. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to work out that way for Alabama. There's some obviously some speculation about the kind of years those players are going to have. But when you look at what Georgia still needs to do, the recipe for a national champion, the ingredient it needs to add to that is making sure it has top-end performances this upcoming season, the likes of which what expected for Alabama, 6 players in the top 20. You've heard a lot about the attrition off LSU's roster, both in terms of guys that got drafted off last year's team. I think it was a total of 14 draft picks. There have been a ton of opt-outs already for LSU going into this season, including the wide receiver Jamar Chase. But even with all those departures off the LSU roster, LSU still has more guys on this list of top 50 players in college football that are expected to play this season than Georgia does, with just LeCounte and Newman in the top 50. So as a fan that wants Georgia to win a national championship, admittedly, the one thing I wonder is, does Georgia truly have enough great players to get that done? And when you look towards the upcoming season, the clue that you can get that Georgia is on its way to a big-time performance, the kind of performance that could lead to an SEC championship, the kind of performance that could lead Georgia into the college football playoff and actually win that trophy, you will see these individual names occurring, whether it's from the crop of outside linebackers, Jermaine Johnson, we heard from on yesterday's show, Nolan Smith, who was the former number 1 recruit in the country, guys like Trayvon Walker on defense, Nakobe Dean on defense. Obviously, some of the offensive names. Someone like George Pickens, who somehow doesn't make this list, but certainly could make other people's lists of top 50 players, making sure he truly has that kind of season. Those individual performances, when they raise their level of play collectively, that adds to the kind of team success that can get Georgia to where it wants to be at the end of the season. If you're a fan, watching to see that occur is something I think you'll definitely want to pay close attention to. Now, as far as the 2 names that make the list, I think it's kind of interesting that Jamie Newman on here at number 44, it's kind of funny that the media, many fans, very sure of what they're going to get from Newman. As it stands right now, at least what Kirby Smart's saying publicly, he may not quite be so sure as the rest of us are. Going off, the first scrimmage after Saturday certainly wasn't heaping a lot of compliments in Newman's direction. They're still in the process of deciding who the starting quarterback's going to be, and maybe just now seeing nice results and success from that offense, maybe led by Jamie Newman. Here's Kirby Smart talking about that from Saturday.
I'd like for every one of them to be successful and do well. The tough thing is, going against our defense day in and day out, putting things in that we didn't have a spring to go through. I think offenses traditionally start out a little slower than defenses. That's just the way it's always been in football. But the last probably 3 to 4 days, there's been ray of light. There's been more plays made. Certainly today when they went against the twos, which one offense doesn't always go against the twos, there was a lot of ray of light. There was guys scoring left and right. So, but I don't think anybody's separated, if that's what you're asking. And as far as the timetable for that, I don't have a timetable for that. It's got to happen.
So if we take Smart at his word right there, he's not quite caught up with the rest of the media yet, even being so certain that Jamie Newman's going to be one of the 50 best players in college football, even if that eventually is the case. Smart says, well, only just now are we even seeing the rays of light from this Georgia offense that so many of us kind of expect to see once games begin later on this month. However, let me finish this entire topic on a positive note. I do believe it's absolutely true that Georgia needs more players to step up and become kind of in the ranks of great players in college football. More guys to raise their level of play, put themselves in a conversation for being like a first or a second round pick in an NFL draft. That's the missing ingredient, I believe, towards Georgia's national championship resume. But one of the things that can potentially help get Georgia there is the kind of leadership that Georgia has on its roster right now. Does Georgia have enough great players? That remains to be seen. Does it have the kind of leadership from the ranks of players that could push guys towards greatness? I think there's a chance it could be true. I think there's a chance that Georgia could have that. Let me give you an example of this from the other guy that made this list, Richard LeCounte, on the list of 50 best players, one of the best safeties in all of college football. He needs more guys to join him on a list like this by the end of the season. Well, there's a hunger and an appetite that LeCounte has for success that I think could be contagious. It's the kind of thing that I think could push other guys on the roster to eventually be just as impactful as LeCounte's expected to be. LeCounte spoke about this a few days ago when we kind of started off Georgia practices, and the attitude that he's bringing into this upcoming season, I think could help drag some other guys kind of where he and the rest of this roster wants to go. Here's Richard LeCounte.
I wanted to come back and play ball again for Georgia. You know, I think my time here was done. My mission wasn't completed, so I came back, you know, to be able to try to lead a team and go for a national championship.
So LeCounte, who already, according to ESPN, ranks among the 50 best players in college football, says, I'm not done, though. My mission's not complete. And if LeCounte, who may be a little closer to draft success than other guys on this roster, if he's saying that, then the attitude that he possesses could also push other Georgia players along as well. A lot of good players, a lot of potential to even be better than that. 2020 needs to be the year in which that potential is realized. And these guys do come into their own. They become 50 best players in college football on lists like this at the end of the season. They make all SEC teams. They make all American teams. They put themselves in the front end of the NFL draft conversation. If that happens, you better believe that Georgia will be in the thick of the national championship race all season long. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, and we are glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them. I even post the show each and every day at the world-famous DawgNation.com, and we really appreciate you being with us on the show today. And as I said before, huge thanks to our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort for making it all possible. You know, they're two great locations. They're both about 2 hours from Atlanta, easy to get to, fun getaway. The original Harris Cherokee Casino Resort property and the Harris Cherokee Valley River. And what makes these great resort destinations even better now are the great care they're taking to make sure the guests and the visitors are all safe. There's social distancing measures put into place, but listen, the same great dining experience, spa experience, gaming experience, entertainment experiences that you're used to, they're all still there for you at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. So please make sure you check this out. Check them out online as well. Website is Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That'll get you in touch with Harris Cherokee Casino Resort and give you a chance to book your stay today. They got special events going on all the time. You check out the website. You can learn even more about that. It's Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. All right. I am going to get Connor Riley on the program in just a moment. Before that, can we do something really quick? So Jeff Sentell dropped a very interesting nugget the other day into the forum at forum.DawgNation.com. You may have read his story with 2022 quarterback MJ Morris on the website at DawgNation.com, but in the forum.DawgNation.com, Jeff put out some information that wasn't in the original story. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I thought this is pretty interesting insight. And sometimes when recruits relay the message they're getting from Georgia, sometimes it gives us insight into what's actually kind of going on behind the scenes, maybe a little bit at UGA. Maybe Kirby Smart says these kinds of things to recruits all the time, but in view of kind of how the offense is going to change at Georgia and what things are going to be like in the future, listen to this quote from Morris talking about what Kirby Smart told to him. I'm going to read a few sentences to you. You can read the entire thing for yourself. in Jeff's thread at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com. MJ Morris starts by saying that he, meaning Kirby Smart, said one thing that really stuck out a while back when he was talking to my mom and I on a visit. MJ Morris says Kirby Smart said you really have to pay attention and get your best relationship with the head coach because the head coach is going to be there. All the other coaches, MJ Morris says, and we'll read the rest of that quote, might be there for a couple of years, but then they might want to go to become a head coach or a coordinator at another program. MJ Morris, quoted by Jeff Sintel at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com, says, Kirby Smart said, have your best relationship with me because who knows how much all these other assistant coaches are even going to be there and how long they're going to be there. Now, I don't want to read too much into this, but it certainly suggests the possibility that a guy like Todd Monken here as offensive coordinator, who certainly reached out to MJ Morris very quickly when he got the job and has been a factor in his recruiting. There's a way of reading that quote from Morris as it was relayed, what Kirby Smart had to say. Maybe they don't think of Todd Monken as a long-term proposition, someone that is here to work his way back up towards being a play caller in the NFL again or a head coach at the college ranks again, something that Monken was before. And if that's the case, I don't take that as a bad thing. I think that Georgia can be the kind of place where offensive guys, resurrect their careers. That's what's happened at Alabama a couple of times. Lane Kiffin was kind of on the outs in college football, but he resurrected himself as Bama offensive coordinator starting in 2014 for 3 seasons there, became a head coach again after the fact. No one had heard of Brian Dable before he replaced Kiffin in that job, and now he's offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. Steve Sarkisian was definitely in kind of a weird spot in his career when he first came to Alabama, and yet he was a head coaching candidate this past offseason, got a huge raise to stay at Alabama. Bama's been the kind of place where offensive coordinators have come to rebuild their reputation, resurrect their careers, and in some cases they've moved on to bigger and better jobs. The Georgia offensive coordinator ranks could work very much the same way, and if it does, not saying I wish Todd Monken quickly on his way out the door, but if it does work out that way, then all of a sudden Georgia becomes the kind of place that the best offensive minds are going to want to work at, admittedly much the way it has been at Alabama the last couple of seasons as well. So you don't want to read too much into what MJ Morris says, but the idea that Smart is pushing a quarterback to consider the head coach, maybe more than the position coaches, the coordinators in place, kind of suggests that maybe the pathway at Georgia may work out a little bit in the future the way that it has in Alabama in recent seasons. And as I said before, I think that could potentially be kind of a good thing. So interesting stuff from MJ Morris there. Make sure you check out more of that at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com. All right, we're busy today. A lot of interesting maneuvers around the SEC right now. More trouble for LSU, as of for instance. Game time announcements. We got a lot to cover over the course of our time. But for now, on everything that happened Saturday for the Georgia scrimmage and what's ongoing with Georgia practices, let's talk to Connor Riley right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will bring in Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily. Normally, Connor, a lot of times, is our in-studio producer. Connor's been on the road here a little bit over the last couple of days. And, Connor, I don't mean to violate any kind of like HIPAA law or anything like that, but I was talking to Mike Griffin on the show yesterday. He was kind of on an unusual day on a Tuesday. I was talking to him about it. He had kind of a bum tooth, and he was saying that you had kind of a bum knee. So I don't mean to put your business out there on Front Street, but are you doing okay? Are you in good enough health here today? Maybe not. We'll see if we can get the phone situation cleared away with Mr. Connor Riley here in just a moment. And while we're doing that, maybe I'll have some time to take some of your comments there as well. So we will figure out what's going on with that, and we'll kind of dive back into your comments here. And there's a lot of fun stuff to talk to Connor Riley about, and we'll do a lot of that with all of you coming up in just a moment. Hope you're all doing well and having a good day. In fact, let's check in and see what's going on here. Matt Rukavina says, Connor, are you there? Apparently not for Connor right now. Winston Mock says you're going to put Connor on the PUP list. Yeah, I always like the NFL's PUP list. Physically unable to perform. That's a spot a lot of us hope we never are. Jermaine Dunbar says BA is always about who deserves the opportunity to prove themselves. That's why I always respect him. Jermaine, thanks for the kind words on that. As I said before, this I do think is a crucial situation facing Georgia. There is no shortage of names on the list of potential very good players for UGA, right? We all know that. But you got to have some of those guys kind of cross that line, over the threshold of just potential and actually be great. Be what Derek Stingley has been for LSU. Be what when healthy Dylan Moses has been for Alabama, what Georgia's had guys do before. You've got to have guys go from the ranks of good into the ranks of being great and kind of getting that done there. I think that's really important. Let's see what else. Checking in on some Facebook conversations here. James grew up on the subject of JT Daniels. Yeah, obviously, Daniels is one of those guys that is seemingly in good enough health right now to be a part of the scrimmages where he's not, tackled to the ground, but maybe not quite, cleared when it comes to, as Kirby Smart said, true contact football, the kind of thing you experience in a normal game, in which guys, actually do get tackled to the ground, that there's a difference in sort of the, the health threshold for that. I think that makes a lot of sense to a lot of us. I think that's a very different situation, but a similar scenario with maybe Dwan Mathis at the end of last year, where Mathis was practicing and participating, but obviously, to play in a tackle football game would just not have been able to do that. But by the end of last season, was kind of participating in a regular situation in practice, because in practices, those quarterbacks aren't getting truly hit that way. What else is going on here on Facebook for a moment? Yeah, Brian Williamson also weighing on this too. Jacob O'Neill laughing about me thinking we were ready to go with Connor, then not being able to. Gerald Harmon says y'all expect Morris to sit behind Vandegrift. Yeah, so Gerald, I don't really know what's happening with Georgia's 2022 quarterback situation. I'm not even 100% sure right now that MJ Morris is necessarily the top priority for Georgia in that 2022 situation. I think he is on that list, but I mean, Jeff Sentell told us this a few days ago when he joined us that there's actually a good bit of depth at the quarterback position in the state of Georgia for 2022. So I think that Morris is an interesting name, because I do think that he earned a lot of praise at Carrollton last year, and the fact that he's in the Atlanta area back at Pace Academy this year, I think makes him kind of an interesting name. But I don't even know what Georgia's 2022 quarterback priority is. I really don't know that. For instance, if the South Carolina situation were to fizzle out, and if Muschamp were to get fired, Mike Bobo were to lose his job there, would Georgia circle back and be back involved again in the Gunnar Stockton recruitment, given the fact that they were in the top two for each other? Stockton had Georgia in his top two not too long ago. Would that be a factor there? There's a lot of that 2022 quarterback situation I'm just not 100% sure of. We'll do a couple more here on Facebook, then we'll get some YouTube comments, and hopefully by then we'll have the phone situation figured out and be ready to talk to Connor Riley. Anthony White says, Georgia being the next big OC factory, I'm definitely good with that. Yeah, that's kind of, what I was, mentioning a little earlier, that when it comes to these like really upwardly mobile coaches, what Joe Brady was for LSU last year, what, Brian Dable once was for Alabama in, I guess it would have been the 2018 season. When it comes to, guys like that in that situation, I don't think you can expect to keep those guys forever. For whatever reason, there are a few defensive coordinators that have stuck around the same place for a long time that seemingly don't want to be head coaches for whatever reason. You don't have a ton of those guys on the offensive side of the ball. You just don't. And I've always said that hiring a really quality offensive coordinator has gotten more difficult because how quickly these guys become head coaches, and because of everything else with that. That you've got to be good at hiring people, and you've got to be you've got to be really good at hiring people. You've got to be really good at identifying who those next rate coaching candidates are, and you've got to be willing to let them come into your program, work their way up, and move their way on out after that, and go on and get a bigger and better job. If that's what Georgia's about to do from an offensive coordinator standpoint, I don't think there's any problem with that whatsoever. So let me get ready to take a couple YouTube comments. I'll kind of update you on the situation. So apparently Connor's got a little bit of a bad cell right now. We're going to try to catch up with him in just a few minutes. Why don't we do this? Let us take a few more comments here. We will roll on. We will do some of the rest of the show, and then we'll catch up with Connor Riley again before we're done today. Let's plan on doing some of that here. We may go just a little bit longer to try to get some of this in. So, every now and then you got crazy days, and this is apparently going to be one of those. So we will We'll take a few more of your comments now. We'll roll on. We'll do the rest of the show, and we will catch up with Connor Riley again coming up in a few minutes after that. So let me pop over to YouTube, get a few comments, and we'll find out what folks are having to say over there. Jay Scheib says, where do you see Georgia's greatest weakness besides field goals, LOL? Yeah, we're still trying to figure out what the kicking situation for Georgia is going to look like. I mean, ultimately, I think it comes down to this. Georgia last season, and really, for most of the Kirby Smart era, has probably not quite had enough explosive plays on offense and negative plays on defense. The kind of exciting highlight plays, the big touchdowns, long throws, last year not enough long runs, and those dynamic game-changing plays on defense, those sacks, those tackles for loss. I don't know that you call this a weakness because we don't yet know if it will be a weakness for this team this season. But if you look at biggest unanswered questions, things that could be a weakness, if Georgia is, I'm going to use, the kind of benchmark numbers that we would typically think of around a 12-game schedule, a 10-game SEC-only schedule makes these statistical benchmarks way different. But if you look at, what we would, in a normal year, if this is a Georgia team that's going out there and they're trying to limit yards and limit points, but they're only getting about 30 sacks, that's probably not good enough to win a national championship. It's just probably not. And I think it's very easy to pad your defensive statistics against kind of mediocre to average offenses. And we saw last year when Georgia takes on a truly great offense like LSU, if you're not matching their explosive plays with your own explosive plays, or if you're not matching their offensive explosives with your ability to create sacks and tackles for loss, you're probably going to get blown out. Now, if Mike Griffith were sitting here, he'd say, well, you can't expect Georgia to do anything like that because LSU's the greatest team of all time. I'm not willing to give Georgia that much of a free pass to say, well, Georgia, who's recruited 5 stars on top of 5 stars on top of 5 stars for years and years and years, was somehow powerless and helpless to do anything against that LSU team from a year ago. That's not the expectation we had during the beginning of the season. And frankly, there were a couple of SEC teams last year that played that LSU team a little closer than Georgia did. Honesty compels me to admit. So if I'm looking at a weakness from Georgia, those are the unanswered questions, I believe. Can Georgia take some of these outside linebackers, defensive linemen, and turn them into, as I said off the top of the program, truly great players that are able to really make a substantial impact to the point where everybody in college football knows their name. Don't have to be as good as Chase Young, but you know what a Chase Young type season is, where everybody is just aware of that player at all times. Can Georgia find that from the ranks of Trayvon Walker, Nolan Smith, guys like that? Offensively, much the same way. We talked yesterday about George Pickens on the show. There is not going to be any appetite this season for when games are done and Pickens has 3 catches, if that were to happen, someone to just sort of just shrug it off and say, well, what do you want him to do? Defenses are, all over him. They're double teaming him, things like that. I'm telling you right now, and this may be relevant if it actually happens during the season, Georgia's still going to find a way to get George Pickens the ball. Somehow, some way, you've still got to find a way to do it, and you've got to use the presence of Pickens to make things easier for some of the other players in the roster there as well. You've still got to do all of that. You've got to find more explosive play. So where does greatness show up on this Georgia roster this year? In the ranks of how many explosives you produce offensively and how many dynamic, game-changing plays you can make defensively. Dennis Wilson checking in. He says, ready for that 8-2 season. Listen, Dennis, I'm not saying Georgia's going 8-2, but if some of these SEC teams do go 8-2, they're going to be in a pretty good shape, maybe more so than you realize. Scott Harris says, do you really think LeCount's the best player in our defense, or Newman is the best player in our offense? He says, I think it's Jordan Davis or Ojulari or Nolan Smith or Pickens or Zeus. You may be very, very right about that. That what LeCount benefits from right now is just the fact that he has been around for a while and people do know about him. Kind of the same way for Jamie Newman, for whatever reason, who's just been such a talked up guy thus far this offseason. You may be right about all of that. But I love Azeez Ojulari, but 5.5 sacks is not going to be enough to get you on a top 50 list of players incoming to start a season. It's just not going to be good enough. Ojulari is very, very good, but not good enough to be on the national radar on the basis of just what he did a year ago. Same thing for a guy like Jordan Davis. If the country is shocked by how good a Georgia player is they maybe don't really know about right now, I'd say there's a really good chance that Jordan Davis is one of those guys that could just be shockingly good, that's not on people's radar prior to the start of the season. But on the basis of just what Davis did a year ago, that's not going to get him attention on a top 50 list. What you're referencing, and I think you may be accurate to say this, it's just the difference between people who kind of live and die with every moment of a program, that know every player in that program, compared to the folks who only are aware of kind of the national survey, the same way that we'd know a couple of guys in the Ohio State roster, but we don't know, every storyline for every single one of those players and who hasn't lived up to the hype and who's better than expected. You'd have to just be embedded in Columbus to know that, as well as many Ohio State fans do. We know way more about some of these Georgia players. A Davis, an Ojulari, a Nolan, a Trayvon Walker, they may very well just burst onto the scene this year, but on the basis of just what they've done thus far, it's not enough to get them on the national radar. But I think your point's probably a good one all the way around. Michael Porter says, do you think UGA will be up for a college football national championship? Yeah, Michael, I started the show by talking about this by saying the one concern I would have for why Georgia might not get there is, does this team truly have enough great players? As one of our commenters has mentioned, candidates for greatness, no shortage of that. Georgia may have more good players than any team in the country, but who among this roster are ready to be great players, ready to be the best at their position in all of college football? That's the unanswered question I think that Georgia still has, and will determine if it wins a national championship this upcoming season. Chase Barbie says lack of respect will motivate these young UGA studs and they will flatten the world of the haters. Maybe that's the case. We will certainly see. Shelton Tucker says, I can see less rushing plays for Zamir White and James Cook when Newman is at quarterback versus JT Daniels. I think that Georgia's still going to run the ball plenty. I think it should. I think you have to run the ball to win the SEC. The trade-off that Georgia's trying to make is it's trying to add to its list of explosive plays without sacrificing the physicality that's been kind of the hallmark of the program. I think sometimes Georgia's offense was a little too telegraphed last season. You just kind of knew what Georgia was going to do. You have to have some element of surprise. Otherwise, it just becomes very easy for opposing defenses. So I do want to see the Georgia offense change and evolve a bit. But you don't want that evolution to come at the trade-off of all of a sudden now you can't be physical when you need to. And I think that Georgia kind of understands that. I think that Todd Monken kind of understands that. Really, running back has not been a bad position to play in a Todd Monken offense, whether it be in his influence on the Cleveland Browns last year, even though he wasn't the official play caller, or in some of the other stops he's had along the way. Running backs have actually done pretty well when it comes to Todd Monken. Think about the guy at Oklahoma State not too long ago, Ito Smith at Southern Miss. Some of these running backs have done really well. I think running backs can also do well in a Todd Monken offense too. But the one way in which football I think is kind of changing, and you can read this in a lot of the stat blogs, things like that, write about this kind of stuff. It used to be that you ran to set up the pass. I really do think it's just football's just different now. You now throw to set up the run. Look at the NFL where winning teams run. They spend a lot of time running in the fourth quarter of these games. But it's the ability to throw the football that gives you the luxury of running the football, and then which opens the door for you to win games. I think we are less in an era of, hey, you got to establish the run so you can then start throwing the football. I think football's different than that now. I think that if you don't show from the word go that you are a threat to hit dynamic, deep passing plays, then opposing defenses are just going to put you in handcuffs. And I think we've seen that with Georgia, unfortunately, too much. All right, why don't we do this? Let's get ready to roll on with the rest of the show. And after that, we're going to try to catch up with Connor Riley. We'll do a lot of that with him. And we will talk about a lot of other stuff with you coming up on the program here today. So we're going to try to cover a lot of ground here and catch up with Connor Riley still. We'll talk about some of the game time stuff for Georgia and everything else. So we're busy on the program here today, and a lot of that includes more of your comments still to come. We'll still do a regular R.S. Andrews cool down before it's all said and done as well. So we'll try to we'll try to cover all that ground. We're going to try to catch up with Connor Riley, who's got a little bit of, I guess, a cell phone issue or whatever else. So let us kind of move on with the rest of the show right now, get more of your comments coming up after that. Thanks for being with us. It's DawgNation Daily. It's presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, and it rolls on right now.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, it's our SEC Through here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. You know, I have really been in the feeling, you know, I was talking to my parents about this yesterday. So it's September, and normally September means one thing for all of us. It's kind of the start of the season, and just every September of my lifetime has kind of felt very much the same way. This has obviously been a very weird year where, you know, for those of you that care about hockey and basketball, you're seeing those seasons in their playoffs and you typically wouldn't. Major League Baseball has kind of only just now kind of gotten into a rhythm where in most years we'd be heading towards the end of the season. We've got some college football games coming up pretty soon. We got a bigger crop of games this weekend, although I'm not 100% sure what the full schedule even is. The whole month of September and the lead up to the start of September has just kind of felt weird this year. But one of the things that kind of helps us kind of fall into place with some of this is the fact that yesterday we did get some game time announcements for Georgia for some of the big games, CBS, first couple of games of the season for Arkansas, for Auburn. So all of a sudden what has seemed so weird and unusual all of a sudden starts to feel a little bit more normal now. And I'll show you the CBS announcement from those folks yesterday. So I'll give you the full list here, including the games involving Georgia. Kickoff weekend on September 26th. Mississippi State LSU is the CBS game. That's going to be 3:30 local time. It's A&M Alabama the following week. So Georgia Auburn does not get the CBS nod there. That one coming up at 3:30 p.m. Georgia Alabama in prime time, 8 p.m. on October the 17th. That game is going to feel as big as it needs to feel. That great CBS theme song, I love that thing. Georgia Alabama in prime time there on October 17th. You got LSU Auburn on Halloween night at 3:30 p.m. That was the original date for Georgia Florida. Georgia Florida will move back a week to November 7th. They'll keep the same time though at 3:30 p.m. on November 7th. And how about this on November the 14th? Alabama LSU, unusual start time for that, at least in terms of a CBS game. It'll be a 6 p.m. kickoff. It comes on the heels of day 3 coverage of the Masters in Augusta. So that day on CBS, they will roll right from Masters in Augusta to Alabama at LSU. What a fun November 14th night that's going to be. Obviously, those games just feel huge if you're a Georgia fan. 3:30 for Georgia, Florida. You keep that same time. Georgia, Alabama going at night. I think that's going to be just a ton of fun all the way around. As far as other games go for Georgia, kickoff against Arkansas to begin the season. That'll be 4 p.m. on September the 26th. And then Georgia-Auburn, 7:30 p.m., the home opener for the Dogs on October 3rd. Feels weird to say that when it comes to a Georgia-Auburn game. But you'll do that on October 3rd at 7:30 p.m., that also on ESPN. So maybe things start to feel a little more normal now that you're getting some of these game time announcements coming out. Certainly it does for me. Hopefully it does for you as well. A couple other SEC stories I want to get to for a moment. So LSU had another opt-out. Tyler Shelvin, a defensive lineman, is not going to play this upcoming season. LSU coach Ed Orgeron hinted that there could be more of these on the way for the Tigers, suggesting there are still a few players in the roster maybe considering doing this. I like Orgeron. If you want to go back and find audio tapes of me from as recently as 2017, I kind of laughed at Orgeron. I thought he was a mascot. I thought he was kind of a joke. I didn't think he was a serious coach in the SEC, and I was as wrong about that as anything I've ever been wrong about. Ed Orgeron has proven himself to be one of the top guys in all of college football. Last season validates that forever. He coached a great team. He made great coaching hires, and I think Ed Orgeron's proven himself. However, as someone who's kind of done an about-face, at one point in time, very skeptical of Orgeron, to become a big believer in him as one of the top coaches in college football, you have to acknowledge this. When LSU is dealing with far more of this kind of stuff than other programs are, at some point in time, it just seems fair to ask, what is going on at LSU that's causing this to take place? And listen, maybe by the time it's all said and done, a lot of other programs will look similar to LSU, and having players decide if they don't want to play in the upcoming season could happen. There's a chance maybe there's even more of this at Georgia, although thus far it's been pretty quiet on that front when it comes to UGA. But hard not for me not to blame at least a little bit of this on maybe Ed Orgeron, just on the basis of the fact that LSU is just dealing with more of these kinds of things. The Jamar Chase situation, the Shelvin situation. other names have kind of popped up here. Maybe more guys considering it. Hard for me not to blame the situation in Baton Rouge a little bit for cultivating an atmosphere where something like this could have even occurred. Now, I say all that. I am sympathetic to the idea that it must be incredibly frustrating to be a coach, to have guys sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We said this about Florida the other day when 3 of their receivers, 1 of their defensive linemen missed practice to kind of start all that off. It is a weird look for college football to have players that don't seem fully committed for whatever reason. And listen, if you want to not play because of the coronavirus, I totally respect that decision. I don't have as much respect, though, for you want to play, and then right at the moment when practice gets hard, all of a sudden opting out seems like the right thing to do. There's something about that just doesn't come across as, particularly flattering to the players involved in those situations, and I'm not going to sugarcoat my opinion on that. It's one thing to opt out way at the beginning of this process because you weighed all the scenarios and decided it wasn't right for you. It's another thing to be in on it right into the point where the coaches are pushing you to practice harder, and all of a sudden now opting out seems like the right thing. I am very skeptical of that kind of timeline, but that's what LSU is dealing with right now. There are some Georgia fans who are also kind of pointing this out. I had a few folks reach out to me on Twitter and mention this, that LSU, in addition to being, kind of one of the top teams in the SEC, is also one of the most important games in the Florida schedule as well. Now that LSU has, lost so much from last year, I don't know that we've ever seen a national championship team change for the negative from one year to the next as much as LSU is. Now, as I said before, at the top of the program, they still got top players. They still got Derek Stingley and Jacoby Stevens. You've got the transfer linebacker that's come in. There's still some talent in Baton Rouge, young running backs who are ready to step up. Terrace Marshall's a former 5-star wide receiver. So this is not a roster devoid of talent, but it is a very different roster than the one that won a national championship a year ago. And if they are worse this season, it stands to reason they probably will be, then some Georgia fans are wondering, well, does that help Florida? This is Florida's high-profile SEC West game each and every year. This was one of the games in which Florida was supposed to be challenged this upcoming season. Has the Florida schedule gotten a little easier this year because of what's gone on with the LSU attrition? I think it seems fair to say that maybe it has. This is certainly a story worth following. I have sympathy for Orgeron, what he's dealing with here, with all these players deciding they don't want to play this upcoming season. I don't think it's a great look for some of them with the timing of when they've decided they don't want to play. But I have to admit, there's a curiosity for me of why is LSU dealing with so much more of this than other programs are? We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, I want to talk for a moment about the other big story that's out there. And I'm going to try to do something very carefully here just for a moment. The story of the Big Ten and its initial decision not to play this upcoming fall, and then there were rumors, well, they may come and play in the winter. They may go play like in December, January in some of these dome stadiums. And then there was the thought of, well, maybe they will play Thanksgiving weekend. And then there was the stuff yesterday of, well, maybe they may even try to play even earlier than that, some kind of October start, something along those lines. Here's what I'm going to try to do, and I'm going to try to do this very carefully. I'm going to try to talk about this story without mentioning a certain person. That certain person's initials are DJT, and that certain person is the 45th person to ever hold the job that certain person currently holds. Because I think there is an aspect of this story that does not involve that certain person who I don't want to talk about right here. Because the reason why I don't want to talk about that certain person is we are just very committed here to keeping politics out of this show as much as we possibly can. There may be a moment where some sort of political story lands right at our footsteps and we can't ignore it at that point in time. That may happen. But as long as we can, we're going to, because I have never felt the obligation to swing at every pitch. We're just not going to do that here because I want this to be a place where everyone feels comfortable being a part of. And I don't want to be unnecessarily divisive when I don't have to be. But there's an aspect of the Big Ten situation that I think does not involve any kind of political figure, and I want to point that out. If you read some of the reports that are out there yesterday, reports that are quoting people from the Big Ten as a response to the initial news that there was a push to get this conference back on the field sooner rather than later, even in what I would kind of describe as like pro-Big Ten media report that cited unnamed sources that seem to be on the Big Ten side of all of this. Even in those reports yesterday, there was a little bit of an acknowledgement that if they could try to have a season earlier, that's what they might want to do. I'll give you an example. Read Dan Wolken's piece at usatoday.com. People have their feelings about Wolken. I'm just citing him as an example of someone that you might think of as kind of a part of the pro-Big Ten media faction. Even in that column, there was an acknowledgement from someone within the Big Ten that maybe they wouldn't mind trying to do this a little bit sooner. I think what you take from this is, for those of us who always believed there was a potential path towards a healthy and safe way for college football to occur, it certainly seems that there's a growing number of people, even in the Big Ten, who believe that was true. That's got nothing to do with politics whatsoever. It's just an obvious fact, at least to me, that the Big Ten has made a very big mistake. All right, I will finish up with this before we do our Gator Hater Updater. I mentioned the top 50 list off the top of the program of, Georgia having a couple guys on this list, Alabama having a bunch. As I'm scrolling here on the list, let me tell you what I'm not seeing any of at all. Unless I'm missing this. Am I wrong about this? I see Kylan Hill from Mississippi State. I see a guy from Oregon State, even though they're not playing. A couple guys from Wake Forest made the list, by the way, not even counting Jamie Newman, who represents Georgia. I'm seeing Jabril Cox from LSU. Where's the Florida Gator on this list? Are we seeing Florida guys on this list? I see Asante Samuel from Florida State. What are the Florida guys? I thought Florida was the best team in the country. I thought Florida was a college football playoff team. I thought they were overtaking Georgia in the SEC East. Florida not quite as relevant on a list like this as some of those Gators fans might think. Let me tell you what is relevant, though. How about Gator Hater Updater? 1,404 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. And on video, time for our R.S. Andrews cool down, and here is what we will do. We will hopefully catch up with Connor Raleigh here in just a couple of minutes. We need to do that for our radio and podcast friends. We like to kind of include a guest on each and every show. While we're waiting to do that, we'll take some more of your comments. I'll give a shout out to my friends at Kroger once we get Connor on the show here as well. So we'll kind of cover a lot of ground in the time that is still to come. So let me go back over to YouTube. We'll take a few of your comments. By the way, don't forget R.S. Andrews, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews can be trusted to do all that for you because they do all that for us. You may not know a lot about those systems behind the walls of your house, the kinds of things that, who knows how any of that stuff works. Well, the folks at R.S. Andrews know. They've been dedicating their life to learning as much about that as they possibly can. And when your air conditioning breaks down or when your water heater's not working, some sort of other plumbing issue, gosh knows, that causes a lot of stress in people's lives, R.S. Andrews can show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. That's a very, very important thing. That's one of the reasons why, story after story, R.S. Andrews has been delivering smiles. All right, back on YouTube for a moment, some more of your comments, and then we'll get Connor after that. Michael Porter said, what happened to Connor? I don't think it was any kind of scandal or anything. I just don't think he had good cell phone service. I think that's all that was. Nature Gator says a preseason top 50 players list by ESPN is mostly based on players that returned from last season. Let's see who finished in the top 50 list at the end of the year. And Nature Gator's right about that, from the standpoint of who from his team didn't make that list. We might say the same thing from the standpoint of who from our team didn't make that list. Here's the one thing to point out, though. And we've been doing this now for a long time. Comment sections like this, the end of our show. We talk about a lot of these players. Here's the honest truth. We have a tendency to kind of bet the over on everybody. Oh, this guy's going to have a great year. That guy's going to have a great year. This guy's going to do this. That guy's going to do that. It just stands to reason. You can go back and listen to comment sections like this before the 2018 season, before the 2019 season. Sometimes our projections of who was going to be great actually worked out that way, end up being true. Sometimes, though, it doesn't quite work out that way. And frankly, some of the guys that we expect to have really good years won't. So you can dismiss the ESPN list as just one data point, people only basing this off of who was good last year. And in some cases, they'll get that wrong. And there were examples of guys who did have great seasons a year ago that may not have fully been on the national radar before the start of the year. That's all very true. But it's also equally possibly true that those of us who are very close to a situation, whether it be a Florida fan with his team, a Georgia fan with his team, we have a tendency to assume more of a favorable outlook for certain players, then it's also likely to become true as well. So the door swings both ways on that side. Brandon Howell says, I don't think that Florida is going to be having a losing season. I just don't think they are elite. I kind of agree with Brandon on that. Last year, I really hammered Florida as a team that I thought would fall flat on its face and finish unranked. Ended up not happening. Florida took care of its business against lesser competition a year ago. You have to give them some credit for that. I don't think that Florida is good enough to beat the best teams in college football, Georgia included, but good enough to avoid losses against less than the best teams. I do think that's something that Dan Mullen has proven at Florida. They are a tough out. Record-wise, they'll probably look pretty good at the end of the year, but the very best teams they play, Georgia, I would say Texas A&M, those are games I don't expect Florida to win. G. Grace Bama Boy says LSU, maybe they are on hard times this year, but they'll play a ton of young players and then be tough to beat in 2021. You may be right about that. Let me get this comment. Jay Shipe says Georgia's deep quarterback room could be a real benefit this year because of the weirdness of all that could be going on with the coronavirus. I think that's probably true as well. Nathan Morris says Florida will lose to Kentucky and Tennessee and Texas A&M. That's pretty interesting. Kentucky's one of those teams, it's week 1 against Auburn, for instance. The Georgia, getting Georgia, it's a Georgia road game in Lexington the week after playing at Alabama. Kentucky has a chance to play spoiler against a couple of these, really good SEC teams. That's something that's going to be a talking point this season. Nicholas King says that he has libations with some Big Ten people. He says the problem is even if they did play football, not every school would participate. That is true. I think it's possibly true that the Big Ten's an interesting league in that you kind of think that most of the SEC kind of sees the world in kind of much the same way. And I don't just mean politics in this. There's a way to make all of this about politics, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But there's a certain similarity that a lot of SEC schools seem to have, whereas like in a league like the Big Ten, that geographically is just a lot more diverse than what the SEC's geography is. I think it is probably true to say that there's some Big Ten schools that may have to be dragged kicking and screaming into playing this season, even if the pathway did exist for them to do that. I don't think that some of the stuff that you heard yesterday is likely to mean that the Big Ten's playing this fall. All I really think is the Big Ten just wishes that it was. Like, that's what I think is really going on here. Maybe I should have articulated this better on the actual show. I think it's too late to do anything about the fall now, but I think the Big Ten knows it was wrong to make the decision that it made. And it's trying to go back and, I guess, rebuild its image through this by making it seem like they at least tried. I just think that I think they know this is a disastrous decision. And, there are plenty of people out there that are glad they did, so they'll never be called out on the decision that they made. But privately, I think the folks in this league, at least a lot of them do, the ones that have the ability to feel shame, I think that a lot of them know they just made the wrong decision for the wrong reasons. And this is their attempt to kind of relitigate that. But it's not going to lead to them playing this fall. I physically think that's impossible, or just because there are a lot of football players not even on campus right. Let me get a few more on Facebook over here. Belton Johnson not happy with the Big Ten. He's weighing in on that over here. Philip Jordan Wells sounds like he may be getting ready to check out. Hugh Nash weighing in. I'm not sure what that's about. Shelton Tucker, as per usual, he's over here stirring it up with folks. Ryan Wilbank says, no way in hell Tennessee will beat Florida. Tennessee will be lucky to win 4 games. Yeah, I think Ryan's probably right about that. Tennessee is not a team I have very much in the way of expectations for this season. I think they're going to have a hard time even against a 12-game schedule where you would have some wins kind of built into the schedule. I think it's much more difficult for them against SEC-only competition. I think a real tell. I think the best game of Week 1 is Tennessee-South Carolina. I just do. Tennessee-South Carolina Week 1. It's about a pick 'em, I think, from a Las Vegas standpoint. That's a game I would assume that South Carolina wins. If I'm wrong about that, then maybe Tennessee's going to be better than I think. But, I have said for a while, I believe that Tennessee's not quite as good as the average person kind of assumes this season, and South Carolina may be better than the average person assumes for this upcoming season. So I think that Tennessee-South Carolina week 1 is a ton of fun, just a ton of fun. And I can't really wait to talk more about that. But I'm kind of with the commenter there who, as much as I'd love to see Florida lose as many games as possible, I don't think Tennessee's good enough to beat them. They could, but I just don't know. Let's see. Let's get some more comments here. Randy Hall says, do you see more players from the Big Ten in the transfer portal? So a school like LSU now has room to take some transfers, but a lot of other programs just kind of don't have that room. I always felt like, when people were saying, well, the doors are going to be open now for a ton of transfers, I always felt like that was going to be less of a story than people probably thought, because in some cases, there's just not a lot of room in a lot of places. Most good programs are going to kind of want to operate near the top end of the 85 total anyway. LSU is now has some available room, but think about who LSU wants. LSU is just not going to take any warm body that's out there. You've got to be NFL potential to play at a place like LSU, and if you are a Big Ten player, a Pac-12 player who has real true on NFL potential, you may either be going to get ready for the NFL draft already because it's just a little too weird to try to get, acclimated to a school this quickly, or if you're younger into your career, those programs, as messed up as they are right now, are still going to be doing everything they can to try to keep players from leaving. You've seen some, I guess more middling type players transfer from one place to the other, kind of middling program to middling program, but the kind of high-end talent that LSU seeks out, those players are either, like you think of Justin Fields kind of doing, just sort of chilling out and getting ready for the NFL draft, or if they're like freshman, sophomore type players, the programs that they currently are part of are going to do everything they can to keep them actively working to make sure they stay happy. So, even for a school like LSU that's got some space to take some transfers, there's still just not going to be a ton of available options, probably. Not maybe as many as you might think. BJY says, even if we run the table to a title, I still fear we won't get the respect we deserve. And you better believe we're getting that asterisk in the record book. So here's what I'll say about that. That yes, if Georgia wins the national championship this season, there will be Big Ten type people who say that it doesn't count. Or there will be SEC people who say, well, the Georgia national championship isn't the same as other national championships that have been won by SEC teams. This is one of those things where you just sort of have to make the decision not to care what other people think, because other people will always find a way to denigrate the accomplishment. Honestly, LSU fans are living the same kind of stuff. Ed Orgeron's going to get compared to Gene Chizik. Joe Burrow's going to get compared to Cam Newton. Think about the 2010 Auburn team that's kind of a one and done national champion, and basically were never that same level of good really again in the Gene Chizik era. LSU is going to be told they're kind of a one-hit wonder. If you're an LSU fan, and we got LSU fans probably watching us right now, typically we do. If you're an LSU fan, you just sort of have to make the decision not to care what other people think. And if you're a Georgia fan, if you run the table in the SEC, if you win the SEC this year, if you go on to win the national championship this year, there'll be people in the media who are saying, well, this is a sham, it's a disappointment. A lot of these media people just like the Big Ten anyway. That's the kind of part of the country they're from. SEC is a little bit of a turnoff for them. So there are a lot of people who are going to try to tout this as something less than what they think normal in college football is supposed to be. And you've just sort of got to make the decision that you don't care what other people think. That's a really good skill to develop anyway, to sort of strengthen those muscles of just not giving a flip what anybody else thinks about something. And, we may all have to get pretty good at that this year. Because, by the way, when the playoff debate starts, you're going to have the same thing going on, where these SEC teams are fighting and scratching and clawing just to get to the top of the SEC, and by comparison, some of these Big 12 teams or ACC teams, we're going to have a much easier ride. We're going to have to listen to week after week, these, folks on TV espousing all the ways in which so-and-so from the Big 12 may be the best team in the country on the basis of having, beaten, the most average collection of tomato can football teams in the world. That's going to be frustrating too. So we just got to get geared up for all of that. Nathan Morris predicting a Wake Forest upset over Clemson on September 12th. Well, that'd be fun to see. A couple other things here. Trying to find a few more comments to get to. Hugh Nash says, does anyone really listen to what the Big Ten has to say about football? It is amazing how the Big Ten's a part of this discussion in a way that the Pac-12 is just not. And, people can come up with their own reasons for why that's true, but my gosh, it's almost as if no one really considers the Pac-12 whatsoever. I've even seen people in Pac-12 country be like, wow, I guess nobody really cares if we play or not. It's quite amazing. Quite amazing. Certain stories like this can be very revealing, and I would say this story in terms of the push to get the Big Ten playing again, the Pac-12 not, could be quite revealing in a lot of ways. Let's see what else is going on. Huck Finn says the question will be which SEC team will be the most careful, prudent, intelligent in following COVID protocols. I would say that's probably true. I think you can look across the country and see just the ways in which certain governors have handled the situation. Same virus everywhere. Different leaders have approached things different way, and in some cases they've led to different outcomes. We've seen some states, even with smaller population, who've had far more people die. It's an example of what would appear to be a difference in leadership, at least the best that I can tell. I'm not an expert on that, but at first blush, that's what the indication is to me. I think for coaches, kind of much the same way. How you practice, how you congregate players together, how serious you take all of this. No one can afford to be a meathead these days when it comes to stuff like that. I do think coaches handling this process will make them a little bit better in the long run. So I don't think that's. I think it's quite true. We've always felt like there was a healthy and safe way to do this, but the healthy, safe way, or at least I always thought there was a possibility of there being a healthy and safe way because of what other smart people were saying. But the pathway towards achieving that means coaches have to listen to those smart people, and in the SEC thus far, I've been pretty happy with the outcome on all of that. So it sounds like Connor Riley is ready to go. We want to do this because we'd like to include a guest as a part of every show. So we'll go a little longer today than we have in really quite some time. We'll bring on Connor. We'll get this done, and we appreciate you being a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. So after I wrap with Connor, I'll say goodbye to all of you. So stick with us once we're done with Connor, but let's get ready to talk to him right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
For our radio and podcast audience, I will be very honest about this. Normally, DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, is just a very seamless operation where, much like a duck just kind of gliding across the water, but maybe below the surface, kind of churning and burning underneath. That's kind of the way our program is like every single day. This is a take two for us on the Connor Riley interview, but I wanted to make sure we had this is a part of our program here today. So, Connor, we appreciate you taking some time to be with us. I know you're traveling a little bit today. Hope you were safe, hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. But nonetheless, thanks for talking some Georgia football with us here today.
Yeah, I'm driving through Florida right now. I guess it's one of those days I can't figure out what working stuff are.
Yeah, this cell phone situation may not quite work out here today. We'll try this one question. We'll kind of see how it goes, and we may have to move on beyond that. Georgia gets Alabama game time, 8 p.m. on CBS. The Georgia-Florida game, kind of keeping the same schedule going. What did you make of a couple of ESPN announcements there as well? What did you make of the game time announcements that Georgia got yesterday?
I'm not surprised that they got that 8 o'clock Alabama game, especially when that LSU-Alabama game is the same weekend as the Masters, so CBS could theoretically go straight from third round of the Masters right into Alabama-LSU at 6 o'clock there. And I think a lot of people expect Georgia and Alabama to be the two teams playing in the SEC championship game on December 19th. So you can get a primetime spot when they meet on October 17th. I think that's the smart move to make there.
Do you think, and you can answer this question however you want to, do you think Georgia-Alabama at night on CBS is going to feel as big as it's supposed to feel?
Yes. I think, Alabama's going to get to use the light at home. Are both still undefeated. And then, number 2 versus number 3 team in the country, most likely. I think that's going to feel like a really, really big college football game that day.
Yeah, I think you're probably right all the way around on that. I was happy to see Georgia-Florida get its customary 3:30 start. I guess that was never quite in doubt. But with the absence of fans this year, the need for that game to be at 3:30 wasn't quite as intense as it normally would be. But keeping Georgia-Florida at that same date that we're used to seeing, or same time, I should say, as we're used to seeing that, I kind of took that as good news for the most part.
Yeah, fourth quarter there, sun's starting to set there in Jacksonville. I think it's still going to be a pretty cool setup, pretty cool looking neutral site game, which we're not going to see a whole lot of this year, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how both teams sort of handle that environment, especially if there aren't any fans at all in that game, because it sounds like for most of the games this year that these teams play in, there will be some fans in the stadium, at least at the SEC level.
Let me bring you in on a conversation I was having before you joined us here today. So I'm a fan. I want to see Georgia win the national championship. When I think about the reasons how that might not occur, I always kind of come back to some version of the same thing. I know Georgia's got a lot of good players. I think that Georgia may have more good players than any team in the country does. I don't know that Georgia's got plenty of potential of players even being better than that. The recruiting success that Georgia's had just leads you to believe that. I am not quite sure that Georgia has enough great players. In comparison to Alabama, which ESPN says has 6 of the top 20 players in the country, I don't know that Georgia yet has enough great players to win the national championship. Where do you come down on a discussion like that?
Well, so I did hear a little bit of that earlier, and you look at some of the objectively great players they've had in recent seasons. Andrew Thomas, left tackle, that guy, those types of players don't necessarily garner a lot of headlines, a lot of attention. DeAndre Baker, he was a cornerback, but the best thing that he was known for was just not getting the ball thrown his way all that often. So when you compare a team like Georgia and a team like Alabama, Alabama had impact guys at quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa last year. This year, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, receiver, Najee Harris at running back. And those big skill position spots, and even on the defensive side, I think you look at edge rushers and sort of off-ball linebackers, Georgia just, to this point, hasn't had that, whereas, there is a lot of potential there with guys like Nolan Smith, Azeez Ojulari, Nakobe Dean, I think we all think is going to be a fantastic player. I think those guys that could potentially be great players for Georgia and meet that great threshold right now are just all sophomores and have to make that leap before sort of getting recognized for it.
And I think that's totally true, and I would expect some of those guys to make that leap this season. There's just too many candidates for not to have some of them really pop. I guess one of the things that concerns me, though, is the total number that you need. You need some guys on the defensive side of the ball. I would say primarily in the front sevens where this needs to occur. You need guys on the offensive side of the ball. Even if we treat what ESPN does, Jamie Newman, as a given, you need skill position guys to help him out. You need probably somebody along the offensive line to be at least a little bit of a version of what maybe Thomas or Wilson was for you last year. You need some of that. There are just so many different areas in which you need this improvement to occur. You almost wonder, how possible is it? And it's certainly a chance it occurs, but it's still important to note just how much of a challenge it's going to be to get the raised level of play that you need from on both sides of the ball to be national championship good, even in a weird season like this.
Right, because unless it is like an LSU situation all over again, Jamari Sawyer, George Pickens, Samir White, very unlikely that all those guys are going to be great, legitimately transcendent great players. They can all be very good players, but to the larger point that I believe you're trying to make, one or two of those guys might be great. I think if you had to bet right now, on the offensive side, you probably pick George Pickens, maybe you throw Jamie Newman in there as well.
Yeah.
The thing that you just need, like an Alabama has, like a Clemson has, like an LSU had a year ago, you need at least 6 or 7 legitimately undeniable great players. And Georgia has guys that can potentially be that, but right now you maybe only make the case for, I think, LeCount and Pickens are the slam dunks, and if you want to include Newman in there as well with what he did at Wake Forest, that really only gets you to 3. Now, Jordan Davis is a guy to really watch out for. Trayvon Walker, Nolan Smith, Kobe Dean. We have a lot of guys who, as you pointed out, are good players and have the potential to be great. But potential's I believe the quote is potential's a French word for guys who haven't done anything yet.
Yeah.
So it'll be sort of interesting to see how those guys go about making that leap that Georgia needs.
Let me, in the time we have left, kind of talk about what we've learned about Georgia thus far. There was a scrimmage on Saturday. We've all heard whispers about what happened there. Kirby Smart's confirmed some of that. Practice has been ongoing as well. You've been a part of some of the interviews that have taken place after these practices. That's another data point to consider. What have we learned thus far, Connor?
I think we've learned that Georgia's going to be just fine running the football. I think the concerns that still exist do come to that passing game. And one of the things that's really sort of caught my eye is the wide receiver position. Now with no Don Blaylock, with these freshman guys hitting the wall, as Kirby Smart sort of said, it seems like you've got 3 guys you can count on, and at least you know what you're getting in George Pickens, Darius Jackson, and Nate Scott. But that's just not enough to, one, throw the ball successfully at this level to win and have sort of offense that Georgia needs to have. And wide receivers are a huge question mark last year, and right now on, I guess, September 2nd, it still looks like that same big question mark that we had a year ago where, maybe last year was more, how talented is this room? But this year, I just have questions about the bodies because I think sooner rather than later, especially with playing Alabama in week 4, you're probably going to need one of those freshman guys like Justin Robinson or Jermaine Burton to make a couple of plays for you. And you look at what Pickens and Blaylock did last year, week 4, they were not sort of ready or not in that sort of same headspace to make those sort of plays in an SEC environment and an SEC game.
I want to come back to that topic in just a moment. I think that's a pretty good one. Before that, though, let me remind you tonight, DawgNation video channel's new time for Before the Hedge is presented by Kroger. It's Jeff Sintel, all the latest UGA recruiting news. I think even a special guest may be on hand as well. That's typically been the case as of late. It's 8 p.m. for Before the Hedge is presented by Kroger. Great new time for that. Great fun as Jeff kind of goes through all the latest UGA recruiting news, and it's all brought to you by our friends at Kroger, who also set you up for a really fun Labor Day weekend coming up. Lots of grilling time here this weekend. You can plan your Labor Day cookout for less with our friends at Kroger. Save on charcoal, on chips, on snacks, baby back ribs. Also, don't forget the dessert there as well. Maybe do some s'mores, something like that with your family, friends, your neighborhood. Check all that out at your local Kroger. So to go to your point about wide receivers for a moment, Connor, and kind of, what we still need to see develop in terms of, that position group for Georgia. Obviously, one of the things that you and I off the air have talked about a ton, I just had great respect for what Joe Brady did at LSU a year ago as the passing game coordinator. And you kind of alluded to this even earlier in the conversation as well, that so LSU last season at the start of the year, I don't know that we would have had Clyde Edwards-Helaire on a list of 50 best players in college football. I don't know that we would have had Jamar Chase on a list like that. We may have had Joe Burrow, but it's not like Joe Burrow lit the world on fire in 2018, but when a coach comes in and has a great scheme, it becomes the kind of force multiplier that raises the level for everybody involved. The Georgia situation could be much the same way. If we treat George Pickens as a given, he needs help at the receiver position. He needs, running backs to step up there as well. If the Georgia scheme is working the way that it's supposed to be, then all of a sudden those offensive skill positions kind of fall into place the way that, top-end success really requires.
Right. To go look at that LSU situation, Justin Jefferson was a good player. We saw him play firsthand well against Georgia when Georgia and LSU played in 2018. But no one thought he was a first-round draft pick before Joe Brady got his hands on him. So I think there's a lot right now on 2 plates. It's whoever that starting quarterback is right now, I expect that to be Jamie Newman. It is going to be on Todd Monken because the reality is they're not turning over the entire roster like you could potentially do in the NFL. And the offensive players, the guys that are going to have to make the plays, are still largely the same ones that were here a year ago. So there's going to be a lot on the quarterback plate, which we still expect to be Jamie Newman. It's sort of like what Joe Burrow did last year at LSU. Just he has to make plays. Now, I don't expect him to make that at the God level that Burrow did. He can get good and potentially great. I think that's going to solve a lot of the issues you have in Georgia. And the second part of that function is he's going to have to find ways to be creative, to get guys the ball. You saw last year, no one was really talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then he goes and becomes, I believe, the first running back in history to have 1,000 yards, 50 catches. If Georgia can do that, 1,000 rushing yards, I should clarify there. If Georgia can get similar stuff out of their running backs, say Samir White is a 1,000-yard receiver and James Cook getting 50 catches, I know that seems preposterous, but if they can sort of get that sort of similar type of production out of the running backs, I think strength right now. I think that's going to open up a lot of these things for these wide receivers that we still have questions about.
Oh, you mentioned quarterback. Before we let you go, what do you make of the JT Daniels situation right now? Kirby saying that he's scrimmaging, but, not ready to be tackled to the ground. How much of a factor do you think JT Daniels currently is in the Georgia quarterback competition?
They do still have some time, and I think after this coming scrimmage, we'll just know a lot more about his availability and whether or not he's ready to play. But the closer we get to the season and the closer him still not being ready to tackle, so to speak, just sort of furthers my belief that Daniels was more of a 2021 option necessarily than just a pure 2020 option. The knee injury, those things can be fickle. Sometimes they heal really quickly. Other times, like you see with guys like Malcolm Mitchell, it takes a little bit longer for them to come back from that. So if that's the sort of situation it plays out, and they probably knew where his knee was, where it stood when they were recruiting him, and there's probably a good chance that, hey, if he's not fully ready to go at the start of camp, we have no problem sort of treating this maybe like it's a factor redshirt year, so to speak, and making sure he's fully ready to go come the 2021 season when Jamie Newman, a capable quarterback option, will not be on the Georgia roster anymore.
On a different note, do you agree with me that the emergence of Owen Condon, I think, should be treated as really good news for Georgia fans? And I've been guilty of not talking much about Condon. I do think out of sight, out of mind is a real thing. I don't think you can treat 85 guys equally in your mind. It's just not possible. You have to, just certain guys will be more at the forefront than others because Condon's been seemingly hurt. I probably haven't thought much about him, but to hear him praised by Kirby Smart this week, to see him presented as a player speaking to the media, after all of that, to hear what Jermaine Johnson said about Owen Condon, the fact that he is a real, legitimate threat to earn the starting job at right tackle, that's another body thrown into that mix. It's almost like an acquisition for Georgia where a player's been added into the mix that I probably wasn't giving much of a shot there to win that job. And more depth in that competition I treat as a really good thing as a fan. Do you understand where I'm coming from on that?
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important to keep in mind, while, yes, he hasn't been fully healthy these last few years, Owen Condon is practicing against Georgia's defense every day in practice, getting ready, and Georgia's defense is one of the best in the country over the past few years. That experience is invaluable, and it does, I think, allow him to sort of have a more seamless transition to potentially being a starting right tackle, whereas you look at guys like, say, Tate Ratledge, who I think is practicing very well right now, and Broderick Jones. A year ago, these guys were playing in 3A and single-A high school ball in the state of Georgia, and that is a far different level of competition. So to have a guy like Condon sort of get healthy for the first time in his career and sort of show why Sam Pittman, a well-respected offensive line coach, went to Oklahoma and brought him in even when he wasn't necessarily a slam-dunk recruit. I think sometimes with the recruiting rankings and things we get overlooked, that while he might not be the highest-rated prospect in the world, sometimes coaches see them as better players and better long-term prospects. And I think given Sam Pittman's success as an offensive line coach, maybe that's what we're seeing here a little bit with Condon at right tackle.
With that in mind, I'll make this the last thing for you. Even though he was a Sam Pittman recruit, if Pittman was still the offensive line coach, do you think a 310-pound Condon would be leading the way to potentially start for Georgia at right tackle?
I don't think there'd be a 310-pound offensive lineman starting for Georgia if Sam Pittman were still the offensive line coach here. But I think that's one of the things you sometimes see with the coaching changes. It does open up some doors for guys who have a little bit different body types and don't maybe necessarily fit the scheme of what the old coach was looking for. And I think Condon's been a perfect example of that.
Connor, great stuff. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We'll look forward to speaking to you again very soon. And I know you're on the road, so we'll welcome you back here in studio again very soon as well.
Yep, looking forward to it, BA. Thanks as always.
All right, good stuff from Connor Riley there. And for those of you that are still with us on video, thanks for being here. We'll go ahead and hang up that phone. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down here today. Before we get ready to go, and for those of you kind of tuning in a little bit late, I know you're wondering, what in the world's going on? So every now and then, this very delicate house of cards we try to build kind of collapses around us. We had a little bit of a technical issue with Connor a little earlier. Good enough to join us right there. For our radio podcast folks, we like to include an interview on each and every day show, so we do that there. I'll kind of rebuild this and put it back into order again for our radio and podcast audience. So if you joined us late, you're wondering why in the world are we still on the air and what in the world were we doing? That's what that was all related to. Maybe let's do one more comment on both sides before we get our way out the door here. Frank Patterson, CB, having a nice, fun conversation over there. Stephen Rainwright also predicting that Broderick Jones will eventually emerge as a starter, and that could very happen. Could very well happen. You may be right about that. Wayne Kirkland also still excited about Dwan Mathis, and I would say that he's definitely not a player to count out in any conversation like this. I think that's absolutely true as well. Good stuff all the way around. Y'all make sure you check out the AJC, Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Great performance last night from Ian Anderson, the Atlanta Braves. That's good stuff. You can read about that at AJC.com. Get your Atlanta news there. Also, keep up to date on the rest of the news involving the coronavirus and everything that's kind of going on in your world right there in terms of our community and our world's attempt to sort of build back and battle back from this. You can read that online at AJC.com there as well. Also, by the way, PGA Tour, the Tour Championship at East Lake, that's going to be in Atlanta this weekend. Some fun stuff going along with that. You can follow along with all of that as the PGA Tour has one of its signature events of the year. It's a different kind of golf calendar this year, but that's ongoing, heading towards the weekend at a beautiful, beautiful course there at East Lake. Follow all of that and find out more online at AJC.com. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, if yours may not be working the way that it should, get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. I will see you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., for another edition of DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We will look forward to talking to you then, everybody.